all areas of your life. Ones where you're seen and heard, and you can ask for what you want and be taken seriously. Would that be good for you? Yeah. And how many of you are tired of the drama and the conflict and you just want to stop it, right? So that you can enjoy your holidays again and have those fun times with your family and stop thinking about what could go wrong, right? Would it be okay if life was a little bit easier and the holidays were much more enjoyable this year? Yeah, cool. I'm so glad that you found this webinar today, that you decided to join me on your lunch. I know some of you are probably still heating up your lunch or microwaving or grabbing a seat. So if you're a little bit late, make sure that you're registered, and I'll send you the recording when I get it uploaded, probably by the end of today. So please sit down, enjoy your lunch, and just listen. If you've got a piece of paper, that's great, because there might be a few things you want to take a couple notes. Okay, make sure you got a pen too, of course. Cool. So if some of you are new here and you don't know me, my name is Cheryl, and I would like to personally welcome you to our masterclass today. I wanted to make sure that I ran this again because we had some amazing results last time from some of our attendees, putting the tools into practice and actually resolving some conflict in their lives right after the class. So I thought, this is such valuable tools, and I can bring it to you. It's of course free of charge, and it's kind of my gift for you over the holidays. So it's worked for me, and I hope it's worked for you. So I'd like to thank you for sitting with us today, for dedicating your time and energy to actually being here. Some of you will be watching the recording. I know you might not be able to get away if you're at work. A couple of you have other plans. Maybe you went out Christmas shopping, because it is getting close. We have a week still. But I'd like to thank you for being here, because I know that if you showed up today, that you have some conflict in your life and you are dedicated to resolving that conflict, to creating a better life for yourself and for your family. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that you are making the effort. So would it be okay if I shared with you a little bit about me? I can't see your hands, so I'm hoping you all said yes. So have you guys heard of the Hair Club for Men? I might be dating myself with that one. But the president used to say, I'm not just the president, I'm the client. So am I. I started this journey as a client because 10 years ago I was stuck in an abusive marriage where for 15 years there was a real imbalance of power. I wasn't able to say what I wanted a lot of the time. I wasn't able to ask what I wanted, and the conflict just wasn't manageable. And it started out seeming pretty normal, right? I was a young girl, and it took a few years before I started hearing snide comments and manipulative behavior started coming out. There was coercion, there was belittling, just kind of things to kind of like take me down a notch every once in a while. And then it started to escalate. And it happened really slow, so slow that I started to question whether it was really happening or if I was making it up. Okay? But eventually, I realized that I wasn't making it up. I realized that I was stuck and I was in an abusive marriage. And it was impacting not only me, but it was impacting my daughter, my child. And so at that time, I decided that I had to do something different. I tried counseling and all of that stuff, and it wasn't working. So I decided that it was time to leave. So with the help of my marriage counselor, and I used some other resources out there, I managed to get myself out, right? And I'd heard all the statistics about abusive homes, and I knew that if we'd stayed there, that things would have gotten worse for my daughter mostly. So I continued working with those other resources, counselors, women's health abuse groups. I worked with self-help books. I really exhausted every resource that I could find, and I healed a lot. I was really doing well. There was another problem that was still there. My daughter was also his daughter, so we shared her back and forth. And in order to do that, there was some communication that was required. And instead of having a really healthy communicative relationship where we could speak what we wanted and share with each other and work on making things good for our kid, that was an opportunity for him to continue to abuse me. I call it separation abuse. It's something that's not talked about a lot. So I know some of you that are here today may be dealing with that kind of issues. You might be co-parenting. You might be still in the process of figuring it out. This might be your first holiday or maybe your second, and there's not, there might not be actual documentation or like a separation agreement on the table. So I hope that the tools that we have today will help you resolve some of that conflict for your kids. And it's worked for me, so I hope that you can take some of these tools and really use them. Okay, so I was living in survival mode. What was happening way back when after I got out of divorce, and it was about 5 years in, I was still being triggered by a lot of the stuff that was going on, the abuse that was happening. So every time that phone rang, every time I got a text message and his face or his name popped up on my phone, my heart jumped into my throat and I went into panic attack. Like serious, had to get up and leave my desk problems. And I was fighting not to believe all the little nasty voice in my head. And you guys know that we all have one of those, right? It's the voice that says mean things to you. And that voice was repeating a lot of the things that he'd said to me. It was also repeating some things that maybe he hadn't said to me. But my self-esteem and my worth had dropped so low that it was just telling me that I wasn't really good at anything. So he was still manipulating and controlling me through my child, and all the therapy that I'd done, all the counseling that I'd been doing wasn't changing that. So in October, I went to a networking event, and in that networking event, I met a friend who was an unconscious mind coach. And we had a conversation in the corner of the room, and she started telling me about the work that she'd done to resolve some of her extreme health issues and how they had resolved because of unconscious mind work. I didn't know then that it was NLP and hypnosis, and timeline therapy, and quantum change process. All I knew was that whatever she was talking about sounded amazing, exactly what I needed. So I went to see her about 2 months later. It took me some time to save up the money, guys. I was a single mom and I had to be really careful. So we booked an appointment a couple months in advance. I kept in touch with her, and I made little payments, and then it worked, right? I went, and it was a 3-hour session. And within those 3 hours, I came down the stairs at the end of the session, and I just kind of sat down at the table with her, and I said, I don't know what we just did, but whatever it is, I need to be doing this work. I know that this is where I'm supposed to go. So one session it took, and I knew that this was my path. And so here I am 5 years later. I'm a resiliency coach. I work with women just like me who really want to live a life of freedom, but not just physical freedom, emotional, mental, and spiritual freedom, where you get to be yourself again. So some of the tools we're going to talk about today are things that I work with my clients with. I use them with all of them. They're awesome tools, and I hope that you're going to find some really good uses for these. Okay. So let's get started. Okay. Great. So, of course, as you can imagine, I've had a lot of experience in dealing with conflict, and I've made a lot of mistakes. So I hope you guys are going to benefit from my 10 years of separation conflict experience today. And sorry, there's just people jumping on. So I want to say hi to the people jumping on. Hello to our new guests coming on. I just want to say hi. Welcome, welcome. You guys have missed a few minutes, but that's okay. I'm going to send you all a link to the recording. So welcome. We're just getting started, really. So we're talking about the beginnings of conflicts and how I've made a lot of mistakes, and how, sorry guys, okay. So I've made a lot of mistakes, and I hope that you're going to learn from the mistakes that I've made. You don't have to make them yourself, because I've really learned what works. Okay? I've learned what works, and when you add the skills of NLP communication on top of all the other tools that I've learned, there's really going to be a lot of magic today. So, okay, so I want you to go ahead and pull out that piece of paper and pen and think about what problem it is that you want to solve. Okay? Go ahead, write it down. Bullet points are great. In order for us to solve a problem, we have to have awareness of what it is. Right? So go ahead. Is it something that's going on at work? Are you having issues with someone in your family? Someone who constantly brings up topics at the Christmas table that isn't appropriate? Are you trying to figure out how to work the holidays with your children's parent? Is there something going on at work where you need to speak up and you want to have your voice heard? You really just don't know how to get started. Okay? Think about that problem. And I want you to also write down how that's affecting you on a physical, mental, and emotional level. Because every problem in our life has those impacts. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't be such a big problem. Okay? And also put a bullet there for who else this problem is affecting. Obviously, it's the other person that you're in conflict with or that you need to address an issue with. There might not actually be any conflict yet. But also think about, if you're having a problem at work, are you bringing it home to your spouse or your family? Is the problem with your kid's other parent, and the kids are possibly having issues and suffering because of it? Okay. The next question I want to ask, and you might not need to write this down, is the other person aware that there's something to solve? Do they know there's a problem? And the last question is for you. I want you to go in and check. Ask yourself, have you communicated your needs clearly? Okay. All right. Somehow we went backwards. Okay. So is the other person actually aware that there's a problem? So a lot of us like to think that other people can read our minds. And the truth is, that's not always true, right? Some of us communicate very directly. We're direct communicators, and we like to speak exactly about what the problem is and ask very direct questions. I'm a direct communicator. I will ask you what the problem is, how do we solve it, and I'll say, we need to sit down and address the XY problem. I'm very clear about my communication. Not everybody is. Okay? There are other types of communicators who like to infer things. So that's the kind of person that would come in and say, boy, I'm really thirsty. And they wouldn't ask you for a drink, but their expectation would be that you would understand what they meant. And when you went to get your drink, you'd come back with a glass for them, right? But if you're a direct communicator, you might not understand what they're actually asking you for. So we're going to talk a little bit about those, because if the communication methods don't match, the chances of miscommunication increase. So this might be part of the problem that's going on in your life right now, the problem that you're thinking about, the one that you wrote down. Okay. So if you're an indirect communicator, so how can we change that? If you're an indirect communicator, instead of saying how about, maybe you can use terms that are like, I strongly suggest. Okay? So you want to increase your communication to be more direct if you're speaking with someone who's a direct communicator. Instead of using, I think, maybe, really say what you want. That's absolutely right. And here's why. Okay? And instead of, well, what if, you can use, I recommend. Because if you strongly believe in your solution, sometimes other people need to hear it directly. Okay. And what if you're talking to an indirect communicator and you're a direct communicator? Because sometimes that comes off as kind of passive aggressive, right? Some of you probably have had some of those relationships in your life where somebody's very direct. I know I have a couple people in my life who are very direct, and at times it's felt a little bit like an attack, especially if you've been in a relationship where you have been in an imbalance of power. Those direct communicators can sometimes feel a little aggressive. Okay, so if you know that the person you're talking to needs you to be a little bit more indirect or a little bit softer in your approach, then you can use words like, instead of saying, give me your input on, you could say, what do you think about? And leave it more open. Instead of saying that's wrong, you can say in a more questioning tone, I'm not sure that's right. And then it opens a discussion where both people are willing or are able to be heard, right? Or instead of saying you need to, you can say, I wonder if. Right? So be aware that if you are an indirect communicator, the other person might not even be aware of the problem. You might not have actually communicated through words. You might have been using nonverbal cues like pauses and silence and your tone of voice. You might have used facial expressions or gestures to kind of trail off your request. So go ahead and think about that. That might help. Okay. And I hope that's one of the tips that you'll take with you today. Okay. So what else do I have? Okay. So first I want to know, are you really willing to solve the problem? Okay. So lots of people have problems and they just want to avoid conflict. They just want to avoid it, pretend it's okay, just kind of get through the holidays, right? But you wouldn't be here if that was you, because you've already done that. It isn't working. You're going home miserable. there's just it could be like actual out and out conflict happening, or it could be an underlying uncomfortableness. I know we've had that in the past in my family. So I want to know if you're willing. Okay? Would it be okay with it if I shared with you guys a little bit of a story? It's funny because I know my sister Angela is on the call, so hopefully we have a little bit of time at the end. But I'm going to share you a story of stomp, 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 slam. So our family has a tradition, or used to have a tradition. Oh, hold on. There's a little comment chat. I wonder if Ange said something. Let's see. What did she say? She said stomp, 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 slam. Okay, cool. I guess that means I have permission. So in our family, there was a tradition, and we didn't do it intentionally, but there was a tradition that at some point over Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, there was at least one person who was going to get so upset that they were going to leave the room stomping and slamming doors. We nicknamed it stomp, 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 slam. It's become a joke now because for the past couple of years, it hasn't happened. And why hasn't it happened? Because I've picked up the tools, and my sister Ange is also a coach. She has the tools as well. And in using them in our regular everyday life, the rest of our family has learned how to pick them up. So we've been able to open up those conversations where you can recognize from paying attention to different things, like body language. We're going to talk about that today. We're by paying attention to different cues and actually asking the questions, knowing how to use indirect and direct communication with the person you're talking to. We don't have stomp, 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 slam anymore. We still have people get upset. Of course it happens. You throw a bunch of people into the room who aren't the same people. Of course there's going to be different ideas, and people are going to think differently, and someone's going to want to watch this and someone's going to hate that movie and whatever. But we've learned how to handle the communication so that we can best manage what's happening and get everyone what they need out of the holiday, right? So are you willing to ask for what you want and need? Because we had to make sure our family was willing to listen to other people's needs and wants, and they might be in direct conflict with yours. They might not be the same. They might be different. Are you willing to let go of what hasn't worked in the past? Because I'll tell you, when someone slams out of the room, the whole holiday stops, at least until and then we have to focus on resolving it, right? Are you willing to communicate and do things differently and to have a different result? You wouldn't be here if you weren't willing to change something, right? Okay, so my next slide button's a little slow. Okay, so how are we going to get them to the table? Because really the first thing you got to do is get them to the table. So we need to find out if the other person is willing. And that means you have to ask or invite them to help solve the issue. Okay, so when someone asks you for help to solve a problem, they're more likely to want to help if you've asked them, right? And because you're both focusing on the solution, okay? Asking them you can make sure that they feel included in the solution. So and I want to start right here to say, before we jump into this, some conflicts are not appropriate to resolve using the tools I have for you today. Okay? So the other question before you even ask is it safe to address the problem? So if I'm talking about abusive relationships, and that's part of my past, and some of the people that I work with are in relationships where it's not safe for them to have those conflicts, then you need to address it in a different way. And if you have children, we all know if the other parent is that imbalance of power, then there are resources that you can use to help you figure out your holiday plans and whatever conflicts is going on. So there's lots of discussion lately about toxic relationships and toxic people. And sometimes people use the word narcissist. I want you to keep in mind when you're thinking about the problem that you want to solve and the communication that you're going to need and use in order to solve it, whether the person being in the presence of that person is safe and nurturing for you. You know, are you going to walk out of there in a less powerful state or being taken advantage of? If that's the chance, if there's a chance of being manipulated and controlled, then these tools are not to be used on your own. Okay, so this is where you want to use someone else. Maybe you want to call in a mediator. There's lots of other options. If you want to know about that, send me a little message, and I'd be willing to spend a couple minutes with you to figure out, you know, what other options you might have. Okay. So in cases where you're at risk or your children are at risk, we're going to talk a little bit more at the end, toward the end of this presentation, about what you could do to keep healthy boundaries in place. And that's going to help you communicate what behavior and how communication, what's important to you and what's allowable and what's not allowable. Okay. All right. Oh, I forgot to talk about the other ones. Let's go back. So we talked about intention. I didn't talk to you guys about intention. So intention is everything. Your intention when you're having this conversation is to resolve the conflict, to come to some sort of agreement that works for everybody in some way. So that's what we need to set is an intention. How are you going to do that? Being like them and choosing your words. Okay? We're going to talk about all those steps. All right. So setting the intention. What is the highest intention of resolving this problem? The overriding intention to keep in mind is always to be a win-win situation. Okay. It's the starting point. The highest purpose or intention for solving a conflict is always to make sure that everyone comes out a little bit better than where they were, or at least where nobody loses. So a good intention might be our family can enjoy being together. Everyone feels accepted and appreciated. The kids spend quality time with important people in their lives, right? So for two co-parents, the highest intention is doing what's best for their kids. And other intentions could be some of those other ones I just mentioned. It could be that they get to spend time with each side of extended family, or maybe that the kids and the parents also have time to relax. Okay? In order for communication to be successful, you must have agreement on the intention, and that means sometimes it means putting aside your own emotions, your old pain, judgments, and keeping the intention in mind at all times. And this is really important. So that's where you can open up the conversation. Ask the other person what solution they would like to see and what is the intention of their solution. Okay. All right, then what comes next? Okay, so building rapport. So building rapport is the process of developing a bond or connection with someone. And what does it do? It makes it easier for you to agree and work with people when we like or trust them. So natural rapport comes with common ground and using empathy with other people. So you naturally find rapport with people that you're like, people who have similar things in common. We have the same belief systems. And sometimes those people are your family members and sometimes they're not, right? But we can purposely build rapport with people who are different from us by using a few techniques. Okay? So we can use something called matching and mirroring to unconsciously create rapport. So why would we want to do it unconsciously? Well, when we start talking about communication, only 7% of what we communicated actually comes from the words that we use. The majority of what we're communicating, it comes from our body language and our tone of voice. In fact, our body language or our physiology make up 55% of what we're saying. Okay? And 38% of it comes from our tone of voice. For example, if I said, "You guys are the best masterclass I've ever had," you might not believe me because my tone of voice didn't match what I was saying. Right? It didn't match. I was saying something in an angry, aggressive tone, and it just didn't match. If I was able to do more body language, then that probably would have communicated that my words weren't matching even more, right? So we can build the ability to connect with other people, even if we don't agree with them, even if we have conflict with them, by matching and mirroring. So let's talk about how we can do that. Okay. So matching means using the same posture and body movements as the person that you're talking to. Okay. So you could be matching their behavior, their body language, their gestures. You know, how close they're standing to you. What kind of handshake? Was it a strong handshake or was it a more floppy handshake? You can match their tone of voice, the inflection, the tempo, the volume of their voice, if they're a quiet talker, if they're a louder talker. But do it a little gently, right? So when we're matching someone, we want to try and build in a little bit of a time lag. You don't want them to notice that you're doing exactly what they're doing. So build in a little bit of a time lag and give them another 4 to 5 seconds between you might be adopting the same posture that they're using, right? So for example, if you look in the photo on the right, these two people are actually mirroring each other. So that's the other term, mirroring. So in mirroring, you're copying the behavior, but reflecting it back towards them. This one you can be a little bit more intentional for, but I would still try not to make it too obvious. So let's think about it. You can pay attention to the body language and the voice, okay? You can ask yourself, is the person standing, sitting, relaxing, or slouching? How can you match that in a way that isn't too obvious, but is similar? Maybe you cross your legs after they cross their legs. Are their feet together or are they apart? Are they holding something? Okay. So if the person you're talking to crosses their legs or places their hands on a table, you can wait a couple of seconds, 4, 5, 6 seconds, and then match them by doing the same thing. And I'll tell you, this stuff really works. Right? I've used it with my ex to help us get into a place where we can communicate, where he can hear what I'm saying. Because a lot of the times he was the kind of person who just wanted to say his own thing, waiting for me to stop talking so he could say his thing next. I call it waiting to talk. It's not about listening. And we want to create a communication where we're listening to the other person, because that's where conflict can only be resolved by having an actual conversation and listening to the other person. Okay? So you can also look at things like breathing, facial expressions, blinking. Breathing, where are they breathing? Are they breathing up high in their chest? Are they breathing lower down? Are they breathing fast or slow? Okay? So we can subtly adjust little inflections in our voice to sound a little bit more like who we're talking to. I found myself somehow adopting like the English version of accents while I'm talking to people. That sometimes helps. It comes very naturally too. So hopefully, if you're trying to actually work with someone, this behavior can become very ingrained in you, but we can do it with intention. Okay. All right. What else can we do? So we'll want to remember the intention, because at some point you're going to disagree. So even though you might be using some of the tools we're talking about, as you go down into the details, there will be a point where you don't agree, because you've been there before. You've been trying to solve the problem. And because we're different people and we have different experiences and beliefs, we have different ideas about how to solve problems, right? You guys, you know this. So remind yourself at that point why you're having this conversation. What was your intention? What do you want to solve, and why do you want to solve it? And remember, you might need to ask the other person as well. Okay? So if you get stuck in debating something that you can't agree on, bring that conversation back up to the intention. We are trying to figure out a schedule so that our kids can spend as much time with each parent as possible this vacation, because we both agree that it's important for them to see both of their parents, right? Or we're trying to resolve this conflict at work because we're not moving forward on this project, right? Without context, I can't give you some really great examples. Okay, so looking at Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck there, they both are disagreeing over what hunting season is. And like, what's the intention? To recognize that it's hunting season, right? And the details are what type of season. So if we can go back to it's hunting season, that's about getting back to where we can come to agree. So some of the tools you might want to use here is to ask yourself, for what purpose? Okay, so you know the tools, for what purpose? So you might ask the other person, for what purpose are you making that suggestion? Or what's the intention of your suggestion? Right? Those are the two terms that help. You can change the wording a little if you want, but the question, it's to be used in a question so that they can give you the answer. And if you agree with that, great, you're back to the place where you agree and you can go back to solving the problem. Okay. So here's the second tool that I really wanted to share with you, and this is called the agreement ring. And can we agree that the best way to move someone into a place of being open to change is to validate who they are and their position? So this is the key that I've used to get my ex to agree to holiday schedules. So in his family, they always celebrate on Saturdays. Okay? Every holiday was always celebrated on a Saturday. And in my family, we always celebrated on a Sunday or Monday. So it would make sense that it was possible for our child to spend every holiday with each side of her family, right? But the court often suggested to schedule, say, one Christmas with one parent, and then the following year the Christmas would be with the other parent. And cool, that's what the courts scheduled, because they kind of make a suggestion, but it didn't make sense for us to use that, from my opinion, because my daughter could spend every Christmas with both sides of her family. So I needed to find a way to get him to agree with that. Because if you're in a situation where you're dealing with someone that you're constantly in conflict with, you might also find that your suggestions, they at least with my ex, he spent a lot of time disagreeing to everything I suggested, simply because it was my suggestion. How did I get around it, right? Because it was me who got around it. So the agreement frame is a negotiation tool used to displace the resistance and create agreement in any conflict, okay? So we were able to agree because I validated how important it was for her to be able to be with his family every year on the Saturday. So that worked for us for the holidays that always fall on the weekend. So Easter for us and Thanksgiving for us are always on weekends. So we were able to agree that he would always get the Saturdays of those holidays, and I would always take her for the Sunday and the Monday. He would get Friday and Saturday, I would get Sunday, Monday. It worked for us, right? So what did I do? How would you guys like to know the simple phrase that you can say to get anyone to increase their ability to say yes or agree with you? I know some of you are nodding. So it's called the agreement frame. Okay? And it's NLP language. It's very specific. So these are the words that you would use. You're going to start out your sentence by validating the other person's point of view. And if you agree with them, with their point of view, I agree it's important for our child to spend time with both families. You can say, I agree. If you do not agree, you can use one of the other two words. I appreciate that you really want to see her on, I don't know, Christmas Eve. Okay. Or I respect that your family has celebrations on Christmas Eve that you want her to be included in. Does that make sense? Now, in the middle of those two sentences, you get to say and. Now, most of us usually use the word but. Problem with but is a word that invalidates everything that comes before it. So if you use the word but in the middle of that sentence, you are invalidating the validation you just did. You're basically erasing everything you just said. So instead of using but, we use the word and, because then it starts to join the two conflicts together so that you create a bridge, okay? So I would say, I really appreciate that you want our daughter to be with you on Christmas Eve. And we have a lot of Christmas Eve traditions that I don't want her to miss. So how can we share the time, or when can we exchange so that she gets to do both? See how that erased the conflict? So I appreciate, I respect, or I agree. And then you state what you want or the solution you want. Okay, cool. Does that make any sense? Okay, so we're going to avoid the use of but. Okay? And the other one I want to point out is you must use one of those three words. I appreciate, I respect, or I agree. A lot of us tend to use the word I understand. And I understand can be a problem because like we all can agree that we haven't lived the same lives. We don't have the same experiences. We don't have the same belief systems. We don't have the same families sometimes. And it's almost impossible. Actually, I have to go out and say it is impossible for you to actually have the same experience. So therefore, how can you ever really understand how someone is feeling on the inside? So please avoid using I understand in any conversation, whether you're in a conflict conversation or not, and default to I appreciate, I respect, and I agree. I have solved so many conflicts in my life this way, including conflicts at work, including places where there was significant consequences to not coming to an agreement. Okay. Okay, so what are the results? Obviously, my daughter got to see both sides of her family every holiday. We were able to resolve that. And my ex thought that he won. He really did. He thought that that he was the one who came up with the idea. And that was okay with me because it worked out for me. And more importantly, it worked out for my kid. She got to see both of her family members on every holiday. So she wasn't really missing out on much, right? So it's turned around toxic situations at work for some of my clients. In fact, one of the people that I talked to that was on the webinar the first time we did this resolved a conflict at work, and he is so appreciative that all it took was changing the way the conversation was started and moving back up to the intention when there was disagreement in the details, and it worked. Okay, so it can turn relationships around, and I've used it in relationships too, where you know right at the beginning where you're about to get into a disagreement, step back, figure out the intention, use some of those words, and you never end up in a conflict, right? All right, so I want to talk about how I can help more. I put a couple of options up there. Many of you have been thinking about those conflicts in your life and how this can help you. So if you're on the call today, if you've logged in today, I'm going to offer the first 10 people on the call a complimentary 20-minute call with me that can happen next week before Christmas, or the following week in between Christmas and New Year's, because like the holidays don't stop when Christmas Day. We have all these other gatherings that we go to. So what is that about? I want to help you dig into the specifics of the conflict that you're having and sound out any possible solutions. And then I'm going to clarify what your plan will be on how to resolve the issue. So we'll give you a little couple tips and tools. So I want you to send me a private message. And when I reply with the link to book I'll apply with the link to the video recording and a link for you to book your call. So like I said, there's only going to be 10 spots. I am doing this as a gift to you as well. So please honor that. If you really need that, if you really want to resolve the conflicts in your life, then go ahead and book that call for yourself. Okay. So there's a couple other things I wanted to mention. It's that time of year where we are moving into a new year. And if you're in one of those situations where the conflict is not to be addressed because there's abuse or a significant power imbalance, then I have another option for you. I have two options, actually. I've got one up on the screen here called the Soul Genesis. There's lots of other single sessions that I provide, including NLP, QCP, and a 6-week breakthrough process. I just finished an amazing breakthrough. So check out my other posts if you guys want to know what that's about. And I'll also be opening up some registration soon for my signature Broken Open workshop. That one's designed specifically for you to reclaim the lost and abandoned parts of yourself that you left behind when you went through the abusive relationships or the toxic relationships, or all those times that you didn't speak up and ask for what you wanted. That's a workshop that'll be for those of you who can relate to that. But right now, I want to offer you some Akashic record readings. So I'm going to offer that for anyone who messages me today, and we pick a date and book it in the calendar. It's going to be $139 plus HST because I got to pay that. So I'm going to offer that for all day today. So you can also PM me if you want that. The other thing that I'd really like to put out there is a QCP. So the quantum change process is an amazing process. When I talk about the very first session I had with my mentor and trainer, the one where I walked down the stairs in 3 hours and knew that my life had changed completely, that is the session that I did in that moment. It was 3 hours that completely changed my life. So I'm going to offer you guys 20% off if you book that before Christmas. So to get more information about that one, you are going to have to connect with me. So please do so. Okay, so 20% off before Christmas. So please connect with me. It's a great process. And I'll tell you, it is the biggest bang for your buck that I offer. These tools are just the tip of the iceberg. Okay. All right. So let's complete. We've got a little bit more to talk about. So those are your tools to communicate. But of course, there are situations where there's complications. So when resolution isn't possible, when you're not going to be able to solve that communication problem. And so many times I was using these tools and I wasn't making any progress. And a lot of those times it was because of these things. The person I was talking to was not willing. They were not willing to agree, or maybe they weren't willing to take responsibility. They weren't willing to change. Right? Those are things that aren't in your control, right? So as much as we might be willing to change the situation and to work with someone else, we have to have two willing parties, right? So if that isn't happening, then communication and conflict isn't able to be resolved in that way. Okay. So what do you do when you tried everything? And I really thought that I tried everything, where I followed the advice, I used the tools, and they weren't working. Right. And it wasn't working because the other person wasn't working, didn't want to do anything, right? And my temptation was to give up. I really just wanted to walk away from all the drama, to write off that person, my ex specifically, and everyone else. I just wanted to drop everything, but I didn't really have that choice. There was someone else who was suffering, and that person was the most important person in the world to me, my daughter, right? So I couldn't walk away from the drama, and nor did I want to at that point, because I didn't want her to live the life that I had lived. I didn't want her to have no voice. I didn't want her to have the voice in her head that I had in mine at that time. So what did I have to do? I had to do my own inner work. Okay, that's what kept me in the game. Like, I had to learn how to believe in myself, but it wasn't for me. Okay? There was an imbalance of power. He was controlling, manipulative, abusive. There was no way for it ever to be a win-win situation. Okay? And it wasn't all the time, but there were specific times when this was the case. And those were the times when I needed to do my work, because I needed to make sure that none of my own issues and beliefs were getting in the way. So I didn't show up to that first session I told you about because of me. I showed up because of her. Because I believed that I was too far gone to get help. I believed the situation was not savable. I believed that we would be in conflict for the rest of the 18 years. And whenever else came after that, when my daughter was growing up, I showed up because I couldn't go one more day feeling like I was failing her. I showed up because I didn't want that voice to be hers. I showed up because I tried every single thing that I could, and I didn't have any answers, and the results weren't good enough. Okay? And I showed up because I found a coach that I trusted. Even though I couldn't see where we were going, I had no clue how this was going to work. I don't even know if I believed it could work. But I showed up because I knew that she wouldn't put me in a place where I was going to be disappointed. Okay? And I hope that in talking to you today that you find that there's a little bit of hope for your situation, for whatever conflict is going on in your life, that there are some solutions out there, and you don't have to know the answers. You just need to connect with the person who has the solution and the tools. Okay? Because I couldn't see the forest for the trees then, and she did. And believe me, I can see so much farther for you. You just need to sit down and have a conversation what it's about. Okay? So if you don't believe you can do this, that's okay. I didn't believe I could do that. If you don't believe this isn't going to work, that's okay. Just give it a shot anyway, because it does. Cool. All right. So another tip that I want to share with you before we're done, we still have a few more minutes left. So setting healthy boundaries. And you guys know what boundaries are about, right? We've talked about boundaries. Other people talk about boundaries. So how do you establish a healthy boundary? The first thing is you need to refuse to engage. Because if you are engaging with the other person, then you are continuing the conflict. And I'm not putting any blame or anything on it, but the realization is there is only conflict when two people are involved, when there's communication happening, right? There were times when my ex would text me and text me and text me and text me. It was like, 30 texts in one day. It was really hard not to engage. It was really hard because he was saying some pretty nasty things, right? So I had to refuse to engage. But let's talk about a different example, right? Let's talk about, because those ones are the challenging ones, right? And healthy boundaries, gray rock. Sorry, there's another person wanting to jump on, so let me just let them back in. Perfect. Thank you. Welcome, welcome. I see you coming back. So what do you do when you've got to establish some healthy boundaries because the communication tools aren't working? They're not willing, or there's a power imbalance. Okay, so let's give an example. So you've got a best friend who decides to host a big event. They do this every year, and she always counts on you to be in without asking, right? But you have something else already planned for that weekend, and you need to respond to her. What do you do? So many of us have this habit of avoiding, right? You don't want to let your friend down. You don't want to say no, and it becomes a really big drama, right? So first you're going to ask yourself a couple of questions. Like, first, do you really need to be there, right? And you might be showing up for the party, or if you have something else, do you really need to be there? You've got something else planned. So no, you probably don't really. Let's just go ahead with no, you don't need to be there. And I want you to think about it. How many times have you agreed to do or help someone, and then it meant that you didn't get to do what you needed to do? It's happened to me so much in the past. I've really learned how to use these boundaries because it helps, because otherwise I get overwhelmed. And then, there's emotions that start coming in, and you start feeling guilty because you didn't do this. And okay, so let's figure out how we're going to stop doing that. Okay, so establish your healthy boundaries. So you're going to state a boundary clearly and calmly in 1 or 2 sentences. What are your boundaries? This is where we go back and we use that agreement frame. Okay, so you communicate to your friend. We really appreciate that you would love my help. I'm already committed, and I'm already committed for that day. Thanks for asking, but I have to say no. Okay? Some people are going to be great. They're going to hear that once. They're going to say, okay, cool. I'm going to go ask this person instead, or I can handle it, or, I'm going to miss you. And then they drop it. Those aren't the kind of people that you're struggling to communicate your boundaries with, right? You're struggling to communicate your boundaries with the people who are going to test you. They're going to ask you again. They're going to throw on some guilt. In some way, your clear boundary wasn't clear enough to them, okay? So you're going to have to restate that boundary, okay? And you're going to do it a lot more clearer and a lot more concisely. So this is where you shorten the sentence that you need. So instead of that long sentence, you might say, I'm already committed for that day. I won't be coming. See how it became one short sentence, right? And expect that they might test you 3 times. 3 times is kind of the norm, okay? So for the 3rd time, you might just say, I told you I can't make it. Have fun without me, or just have fun. Okay? And if this is a conflicting situation, you may be tested more than 3 times. So if someone comes back more than 3 times, you can assume that you might not have been clear enough, you were unclear, or you might not have followed through on consequences. Yes, consequences. Okay, so we need to learn how to use consequences. So, for example, and I can share this with you guys because it's resolved. Last week, my daughter was asked to do some chores around the house, and she wasn't doing the chores around the house. And I stated to her, if you do not do the chores by this time, here's when they're due. I need them done by this time. Are you going to do them? She agreed. Yes, she's going to do them. Okay. So she'd already failed once. So the 2nd time I said, okay, well, you didn't do them when I asked the 1st time on time. So here's your extension. And if they're not done by 5 p.m., then there will be consequences. You can't just say there will be consequences. I set them out. The consequence was you will lose your internet. Now, horrible thing for a 13-year-old. You will lose your internet. So guess who lost their internet? I set a consequence. I reminded her when she was done. She had 3 reminders. When she wasn't done her chores by that time, she lost the internet. For how many days? As many as I told her she was going to lose them. And I followed through on them. And believe me, she will be doing her chores for quite a while now, because she knows if she doesn't do them, the consequence will be you lose your internet, right? Okay, so cool. And I hope that was helpful, right? So go ahead, use those boundaries. Make sure that you include consequences for those people that have been violating your boundaries, or that you're in conflict with. Okay, just moving on. Okay, so what I really want you to ask yourself, right? Because we can't go back and change the beginning. We can't go back and change the conflict where it started. We can't go back and change what's happened in our lives. But we can start where we're at. And I can tell you from my own experience and from my clients' experience that learning some of these tools and employing just these communication tools in your life will change things. So I want you to ask yourself, and you've got to pull out that pen and paper again. What am I doing or not doing now that if I did start to do it or not do it anymore right now would completely change this situation in my life? What are you doing that's not working? Right? Or what are you not doing that's not working? So what do you need to do? Do you need to use some of the tools that I've talked about to you today? Or do you need to get some help with a mediator or someone else who can intervene and help you facilitate a conversation? Do you need to just stop letting it be a conflict and be willing to say, hey, it's not worth fighting over these things, or where am I contributing to the problem, right? And it's completely possible. Showing up and being willing to change the conflict in your life means you're willing to look deep. And that's really cool, because that's where conflict is solved. Your life can get better if you're willing to look at where the conflict's coming from. Okay. Cool. So I want to thank you guys for showing up. If you don't have me as a connection on Facebook, please add me. You'll need to PM me if you want to book any of those sessions or you want to talk about any of those sessions. So please connect with me on Facebook. Look up Cheryl Martin Gonzalez, or you can look up my website, soulsparksisters.ca. I hope to talk to you soon. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being willing to change things for yourself and for the other people in your family that you might be in conflict with, because it always starts with one person, right? Cool. And